You're allowed.
All right, so the Senate Health and Welfare, we're back live and we're looking at H 879, which is the Emergency Temporary Shelter Program, General Assistance Program for folks. The this bill has implications, budgetary implications, that we'll see when Katie walks through the bill with us, and we received a document yesterday from DCF that we can look at. DCF has made a significant set of recommendations in the bill. One of those, and I'm bringing this up before we go through the bill, because one of those recommendations is to include much of the definition and work on the temporary shelter program, and to take that and put it into the task force work. So as you go through and look at what the task force is, and then look at what the program is, the DCF is suggesting that program criteria, guidelines, and conditions be embedded into the task force for decision making and recommendations brought back. And I bring that up only because the recommendations from DCF are long and somewhat dense, but the first page, I think we all have it. It's online. And number 2, I think, relates to that. So we're going to hear other testimony, but I want to bring that up. And I will say that, and I'll say this to DCF when they are here. I won't say it's about time, but it's about time. It's nice to have some feedback on the work that the House has done. It is helpful, but it also is at a time when we're very much crunched for opportunity to work on the bill. So there are other issues in the bill, as I said before, that relate to budget. My goal for this bill is to take testimony, to do some solid thinking. I know the law is saying about this, been working on it. We've been working on it. Been working on something about this for at least many years, and now it's time to decide how we can help folks who are homeless in different situations. I would like to see that get to a point where we can vote this bill out ASAP, so it can travel down the hallway to both appropriations and finance. So that's kind of setting up where we are with the bill. And this is why, for those of you who are offering testimony today, each one of you, we value what you have to say, but our time is not ours. And so we want to hear as succinctly as possible what the problem is and how the bill might solve it or not. That's where we are. So, Katie, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Good morning. I'm Katie with the Office of Legislative Counsel. I'll pull up the bill. This is as passed by the House. So high level overview, the concept behind this bill is that it would be a replacement for what is now called GA Emergency Housing Program. As we talked about when I was last year discussing the bill, when you look at the General Assistance chapter, General Assistance incorporates lots of different types of assistance, but housing isn't specifically called out as a standalone separate program under GA. I think it's referenced with regard to housing. So where does this program currently exist? It's sort of a creation of session law. Every year it's amended in the budget and budget adjustments, and it's also fleshed out and rulemaking. So that's where all of the policy around emergency housing currently exists. So what this language does is it creates in statute the Emergency Temporary Shelter Program that's meant to sort of be a swap out with what is GA emergency housing. There's a section on legislative intent, and then we have a creation of a new chapter. In section 2, there's only one section in the new chapter. It creates an advisory committee, and the reason that this section is separate from the rest of the chapter that's being created is because this would take effect July 1, 2024, whereas the new chapter and the new program itself would take effect July 1, 2025. And the idea is that this advisory committee, made up of stakeholders with lived experience, of homelessness, would, be advising on the creation and development of the program. So that is what is in section 2. Section 3, this advisory committee would be repealed on July 1, 2029. And then we have section 4, which is really where the rest of the chapter is, that's being created on July 1, 2024. July 1, 2025. So we have definitions section. The committee made a point of defining community-based shelter to be something separate and apart from housing received in an emergency situation that's a hotel or motel. There's also a definition worth calling out, which is the statewide vacancy rate. That becomes important because that is the metric used to determine how many days a household would be eligible for housing under this proposal.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Hi, do you also have a question? It just seems like I have a different version.
Version 1.3 is what I've got the draft.
I am walking through,
Your eyes,
I'm walking through as past house. Would you like me to walk through one quick way?
Yeah.
Okay, let me switch
Let's do
documents.
okay.
What's the difference?
I've been asked to make a few changes. And it's posted on the website, and the changes are highlighted in yellow.
Oh, I see.
Those were some preliminary suggestions of take, leave or take, but I think may be useful.
Yeah, no problem. It's nice to literally be on the same page. Okay. Great, so everything I have said so far is still accurate for this draft. Okay, so then we get into section 2202, which is establishing the program. It's placing this emergency temporary shelter program within DCF. And then at the top of page 5, it specifies that a permissible shelter provided through the program shall include a community-based shelter provided by housing and shelter operators, including community-based shelters for designated populations, and hotel and motel rooms only after the department has exhausted other means of providing limited community-based shelter. And then we have language that's lifted from DCF rules about reimbursing hotels and motels, and that they have to be in compliance with other state rules. For example, they have to have a lodging license through the Department of Health, etc. So that is what the language on pages 5 and 6 do. And then I'll bring us to 2203, which is household eligibility. So this lays out which households are eligible for the program. You'll see there have been a few proposed modifications. So the version that the House sent over placed eligibility at 60 years of age, and the proposal would be to change it to 65 years of age. There was a question in subdivision 2. There is a definition of disability that's based on the HUD definition of disability. There was a question as to whether a mental disability would constitute a disability. My reading is that it would, but if there is a doubt, we should clarify that and say a physical or mental disability. Other basis of eligibility is if the household is a child under 19 years of age, has a member in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy or who is experiencing an at-risk pregnancy, has a household member who's experienced the death of a spouse or domestic partner within the last 30 days, or has experienced a natural disaster such as a flood, fire, or hurricane within the last 30 days, A person is under a court-ordered eviction or constructive eviction due to circumstances over which the household has no control. Or has a member of the household experiencing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, hate violence, or other dangerous or life-threatening conditions that relate to violence against the individual or household member. So that is the eligibility.
So it's any one of those criteria.
Yes,
Sounds like-
yes.
So if they're 65 or over, they're in.
If a member of the household is, yes. But
A member of the household,
Then the
whole
household
household
is
is in, or the
eligible.
individual?
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
The next section, 2204, is also worth pausing, here. This provides the maximum days of eligibility. So the concept here is that a family, I shouldn't say family, a household would apply for the program. And they would apply once for a 12-year period. And depending, what the most recent,
12-month period. You said
Yes.
12-year.
oh,
That's a
gosh.
good deal.
A 12-month
We don't wanna
period, thank
send
you,
her off.
that's an important distinction, right?
Wait a minute.
So for a 12-month period. And depending what the current or most recent US Census Bureau data is on the vacancy rate, that dictates how many days of emergency housing that household would get. So you'll see in subdivision 1, if there's less than 5% at the household's time of application, the household shall receive a maximum of 60 shelter days. The version that came over from the House was 90. If in subdivision 2, the vacancy rate is equal to or greater than 5% at the household's time of application, then the household would receive a maximum of 45 shelter days. So this would pertain to days in a hotel or motel, not in a community-based program. And remember that the language we looked at said, if there's a community-based shelter available, that would be used first. And it's when that is not available that a hotel or motel would be the option.
Would you prefer we hold our question to the end or can we ask?
Oh, I think you should ask your question.
I'm just curious, because we keep hearing the word application, and I'm wondering if this bill touches upon the application process at all.
Not particularly.
Okay.
We can ask DCF about.
I mean, there's a little bit of language about it has to be in plain language, accessible, but it's not incredibly detailed. I'll try to flag it as I go through
At
it.
some point, it might just be interesting to know what that process is like.
We can talk to DCF about what they currently have.
Great, thank you.
To Senator Weeks.
Just a quick question. So I'm gonna go back to page 7, eligibility. Household. I'm looking at line 14, which is receipt of a disability check. So as we know, disabilities have various ranges. Is it just purely receipt of a disability check, or was there a certain criteria level that the recipient must qualify for to be eligible? Or is it just-
This is not specifying a certain amount.
Right, and the questions that DCF is asking, as you read through their comments are, does that mean someone who has a short-term disability, a disability check related to workers' compensation? Or what else? And it also then, I think it links in with Senator Gulick's question regarding application. So we'll have to clarify all of that as we go forward.
Good.
Yes, question.
And the disability check is the federal disability, right? Or is this state disability?
I have to find
This
this.
doesn't specify.
It could be a state, that's why the question that DCF was asking in there, they have a little
Okay,
list of questions that they sent along to us.
and I just want to know to Senator Weeks in particular, but just check on page 7, lines 4 and 5 have to be met as well, that they attest to the lack of fixed, regular and adequate nighttime residence.
Right.
So
It's not just.
it's not just that they can be anything, they have to have no place to live. Yeah,
That's the
So
point.
they just say that
That's good.
That's,
yeah, so
household.
Senator Williams would not qualify.
No, no, I'm disabled, no.
all right. Any other questions? Okay, let's keep going then.
Okay, so we've just done eligibility. One thing that's important to note is that these eligibilities are separate and apart as this bill is drafted, from what's called winter shelter months, so that those winter shelter months happen. And these, maximum eligible days are outside of those time periods.
So you can qualify for winter shelter, and you can then also be eligible for the 60 days that are listed here for, or the up to a year. That's what you're saying?
Yep.
It's not duplication.
So being that adverse weather is a separate account entirely, was there ever any intention of grouping the two together into one program? So
There is a section here on what has previously been called adverse weather, but because it is not dependent on the actual weather, it's set by date. The title was changed to winter shelter. Household participation. This says that unless the head of the household has a disability, as evidenced in the list that we just looked at, that the household is to participate in coordinated entry and case management processes. That's language that was taken from Act 81 of last year. If emergency temporary shelter in excess of 14 days is required, including cooperating with the department and service providers on screening and care planning. And then, this is where you find the language on applications. So all program applications and notices have to use plain language. The department is to provide written notice and notice in the household's preferred form of communication of appeal rights related to departmental decisions made in the course of the administrative program, establishing this chapter, including appeal rights related to the denial of an initial application. This is also important, that a household sheltered in accordance with the program may continue to remain sheltered while an appeal is pending until the household's maximum shelter days for the current 12-month period have expired. So if the appeal is filed and the household only has 5 days left for that 12-month cycle, they can stay housed for those 5 days, but after that, even if the appeal isn't resolved, the household would not have housing.
What if they have no form of communication? I mean, it's kind of like. We talked about in another bill where we would send them a letter. And we need somebody to follow up on that. So we're sure these people get properly notified.
That would probably be a good conversation with the department about how they communicate to individuals who don't have electronic communication or cell phones. There is a section on reporting. Oops, I should have put quarterly here too. So as you can see, the House proposal was monthly reporting and the proposal is to change it to quarterly reporting. And if you made that change, we would make it on 6 also. Much of this section was taken from the reporting in Act 81 of last year, which was where you created that transitional program. So I know you're don't have a lot of time, so I will sort of not go through all of the reporting. This is the question that has come up about winter shelter. So the language here says, to the extent funding and capacity exists, and notwithstanding any provisions of this chapter to the contrary, the department is to provide shelter to households lacking a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence between November 15th and April 15th. So the eligibility requirements that are binding with regard to the 45 days or the 60 days don't apply here for the winter shelter. If there is an adequate community-based shelter space available within the AHS district in which the household presents itself, the household is to be provided shelter in a hotel or motel within the district if available until adequate community-based shelter space becomes available in the district. Shelter in a hotel or motel provided pursuant to this section shall not count towards the maximum number of days in the 12-month cycle.
That's a good question. District means is that the department of health district? What districts?
That's correct. I was under the understanding that AHS is often broken into service districts, so, that would be a question for the department.
And the eligibility categories like age and disability status and that whole list doesn't apply to the winter shelter. But I would assume that sort of overarching, that they have to attest that they don't have,
That language is there, that they have to,
Be unhoused.
yeah,
be unhoused.
households lacking fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence.
And do they have to do the attestation for the winter shelter?
Not if this is drafted.
Okay.
Just curious if they attest to not having lacking a fixed, et cetera. Why is there any eligibility? Why isn't it more like the winter session where, if they're homeless, they're homeless?
Question,
Good question.
good question. And they,
So we develop. It's always good to know kind of the genesis of these bills to understand what the perspective is.
well, so let's listen to testimony and see if that question is answered adequately.
Okay. There's a new section added in this proposal, that AHS is to require that all case managers employed by or under contract with the agency or reimbursed through an agency-funded grant are responsible for ensuring that each client of the case manager is appropriately housed. If the client does not have safe and appropriate housing, the case manager shall have the responsibility of ensuring that emergency temporary shelter is procured while more permanent housing is sought. And then we move to an emergency temporary shelter program task force. So this task force is sort of what it sounds like. It is a group that would come together before the July 1, 2025 effective date of most of this language to look at issues that are either unresolved or need further study, with the idea that if the task force comes back with recommendations next January, that gives the General Assembly time to act and fine tune the language in section 4 to accommodate those recommendations. So we have the task force, we have the membership that I know you'll want to spend some time looking at, but in the interest of time, I'm just gonna move past it. And then I'll pause to go through the powers and duties because it's a pretty substantial list of things that the task force is going to be looking at. The process to establish a single statewide unified coordinated entry system with participation from the department. The reorganization of roles and responsibilities within DCS Office of Economic Opportunity and Division of Economic Services. The number and types of emergency shelter spaces needed and currently available for each geographic region of the state with a preference for non-congregate shelter spaces. The identification of a consistent lead agency for each geographic region. Identification of roles and responsibilities necessary in a lead agency. Potential adjustments to adverse weather conditions, which we should update to winter shelter. Process to enable participating households to place a percentage of the household's gross income into savings, which shall be returned to the household for permanent housing expenses when the household exits the program. A mechanism for addressing potential conduct challenges posed by a member of a participating household served in a motel or hotel. The identification of any state rules and local regulations and ordinances that are impeding the timely development of safe, decent, affordable housing. That language was lifted from Act 81 of last year. And 10, a mechanism to ensure that eligible households are sheltered under the program until transitional or permanent housing is available.
If you wanted to wrap this up a little bit, it essentially, if the first section of the bill, or the section of the bill with the program is passed, then this task force can also evaluate what that program looks like. So it's not, so the recommendation that we have from the DCF saying, why don't you just put it all into the task force? Essentially, it's there and the task force can look at it. So it's not that, that helps me a little bit on that question.
So that is a policy choice. That
Yes.
It's adding a duty to the commission to look at, what eligibility should look like, what, a winter policy should look like, what staffing should look like.
Yeah. I know. Okay, we can talk about it. Senator Hurry, go.
Thank you. So there's this task force that, does this part take effect on passage
Maybe July 1 of this
or
year.
July 1, whatever? And then there's the advisory.
We're getting to that.
No, that happened already. That's already, that's at the beginning of the bill.
That's at the beginning of the bill, so what would be enacted if this proposal were to go forward as it is, and would create a new chapter with nothing in it but the advisory committee for 1 year. And the idea is that the advisory committee would be working with the department to prepare for the implementation of the program 1 year later. And then 1 year later is when the rest of the chapter would be filled in with this language.
Oh, I thought you said the task force happened right away too.
The task force is separate from the rest of the chapter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's
is
session
the
law.
advisory committee, they're advising DCF, or are they advising the task force, or who are they advising?
They're advising DCF,
Okay,
and I think there might be members of the advisory committee on the task force, but I have to look at that again.
okay.
Yes, true.
And the task force, is the task force a permanent thing or a temporary?
Task force is temporary, but the advisory committee would exist until 2029.
Okay,
They have advisory 2029, task force 25.
okay.
Okay, so then section 6 is a rulemaking section. The concept here is to repeal existing rules related to the transitional program and the GA program. A very valid point in DCF's memo is to fine tune what we're repealing in the GA rule because there are other elements that still need to move forward. So that would need to be amended if you're moving forward with this version. The House chose to repeal the general assistance program report, as they were satisfied that the new report required would give them the information that they were most interested in. So this is an ongoing report that would be repealed. Section 8 makes it clear that the transitional program that was established in Act 81 would be done with the creation of this program. And that there are several emergency rules that there may be permanent rules filed that are amending GA emergency housing at this time, that those would not be in effect. So let's see. And then again, we have the repeal of the emergency housing, the transitional housing, and our effective dates, which we already went over. But we have on passage, the legislative intent, the advisory committee, and the task force. Everything else is July 125.
And then some of the repeals have based on your work with the specificity of some of the sections of the.
That has to be fine tuned a little bit, yeah, agreed.
Okay. All right, okay, questions for Katie? Thank you. That was the right level.
Okay.
That was really the right level. Good. So we'll now hear from folks who have been working on this a lot. So we're gonna move to Brenda Siegel, who is here, and then Frank Connect, and then we'll move to DCF and but before you, Miranda and Chris, the two of you will be up to the table together.
If that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's great, perfect. And we might go past 11 a little bit, just because to make sure everyone has an opportunity, but I might speed you up at some point. That's good, it's okay. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Do you know everyone around the table? Well, we'll introduce
Okay, I
ourselves.
know most
Do you know
of you.
everybody?
Well, it looks like I haven't maybe tested
Yeah,
from you.
so we're gonna start with Senator Good.
Okay, that's not for you.
Dave Weeks, Rutland County.
Jay Lyons.
Terry Williams, Butler County.
So now Frank, you've also heard,
Yes.
folks are, we're good. Thank you. All right.
So I want to start by saying that some of these changes are new and I wasn't prepared for them today, so I might shift a little and I'll include comments in my written testimony. So good morning, for the record, I'm Brenda Siegel. I am the executive director, I'm here as the executive director of End Homelessness Vermont. I also want to name a couple of other hats that I wear. I work with a national organization heading up research on the overdose crisis and have been working across the country and state on this issue, as many people in the committee know. And I've experienced generational loss due to overdose. And I also do consulting work on human services issues, specifically surrounding housing, homelessness, family services, overdose crisis, and disability rights, all of which intersect with this issue, which is why I named it. In that work, I mostly focus on research, rules, policy, and systems. And so you don't hear from me as much on those things necessarily. Vermont urgently needs an emergency housing program that provides shelter to all Vermonters, which you know, and who are without shelter for as long as needed. So I'm a little concerned about the 60 days until they can find longer term shelter and housing. The only requirement for accessing emergency housing, as the question was just asked, should be current and imminent lack of shelter. Emergency housing should be available in all regions of the state to allow people who become homeless to stay near their schools, medical providers, jobs, and support networks, which this legislation does address some of this. The program should employ housing first principles. I saw that there were questions about housing first in DCF's letter, and I do address it in my testimony, and if we don't get to it today, then it will be addressed in my written testimony. I am a member of the Housing First Coalition in Vermont, and so I can explain that very well. When a person or household is not a good fit for a hotel or shelter, they should be supported with a new placement, and partnerships between the department and providers and advocates would make this work more smoothly. Partnerships that have not worked as well in the past few years. At End Homelessness Vermont, we are a lived experience-led organization that works toward the goal of ending poverty and disability discrimination and homelessness in Vermont. We provide a data-driven safety net to the safety net that is trauma-informed and rooted in compassion, empathy, and housing first principles. We are effective in ensuring that people remain sheltered and have the support that they need, as well as addressing systemic barriers to accessing or remaining sheltered or housed. We work closely with providers, economic services, Department of Children and Families, when available, hotel owners, and most importantly, those experiencing homelessness. Our point of contact is generally at the moment of the emergency or in troubleshooting complex cases, but we have ongoing clients, about 409 who we support, who have severe disabilities, and we have 95 who we help with their vouchers each and every month, specifically. I'm gonna skip over all the different services we provide, but those are in my testimony. As it relates to GA emergency housing, part of my job is to read and understand the nearly 500 pages of rules and interpretations of those rules, as well as any emergency rules or changes as they come up. This allows us to support someone when they are wrongfully denied access to shelter. One of the things that we do is we provide support during a fair hearing. I have often said that just because the word fair is in the hearing process doesn't mean it's always fair. So I really appreciate that it includes having people remain sheltered. I saw that in the department's letter, while that they are concerned that this about people remaining sheltered during that time, because in other benefits, they say that they don't get a continued benefit, but in other benefits, and according to the rules, they get retroactive benefits when the fair hearing goes in their favor, and that cannot happen here. So keep allowing people to remain sheltered makes sense. We have run this hotline since 2021, and the amount of calls that we get fluctuates in the last 3 years, directly related to what the rules or laws are at any given time in GA hotel housing. Since June, we have taken over 1,000 calls, and the amount we receive each week varies from 10 calls to over 200 calls on our most unforgiving weeks. I want to just say in the last 6 weeks since the VAA change, we had 3 times and 4 times 1 week the number of calls we've ever gotten in a week, and we could not keep up with the volume. And that is happening to people on the ground every single day. So simplifying this process is incredibly important for those of us who are doing this work and people in the program. With an extremely high call volume, we also have any time that 211 is not effectively working, which does happen. We seem to be the backup call in that case. We can't do anything at night, cannot provide a voucher, so we're just a voice in those cases. I'm gonna again skip over the ways that you can support. People can access us, but we do have on our website endhomelessnessvt.org or findhelpvt.org. I will take a case on my own if it's extremely complicated or will require representation at a fair hearing or requires other than my staff or requires someone who knows the rules. Additionally, if that individual has disabilities, which is the part that I will get into about this bill, that will require ongoing reasonable accommodation or other complex barriers to remain sheltered. If they need those disability supports, that is something that is not automatically offered, and so we are able to offer that for people. I then work on the voucher at each renewal date. Another situation in which I provide ongoing support is when someone will lose their job if they're going to, in order to do a recertification, because you have to recertify it every single time you have a pay date. So we'll help with and other complex barriers oftentimes for children. Another thing that we often do is we help support people through a data collection process that's completely voluntary. We tell people that they can swear at us, stand up and leave in the middle of the interview if they want. It's just for us to collect information so that we can better support people. In my written testimony, there will be data included that comes from that process. I'm not going to go over all of it right now, except to let you know that a large percentage, 75% of people that we've interviewed out of 210 different districts had a medical condition, a serious medical condition of some kind, and 92% had a mental health condition of some kind. So we're talking about an extremely vulnerable population. I want to go over some of the things that are in the bill, and then but I want to let you know that in my written testimony, it talks about what the process is like for a fair hearing, what the process and ways in which the current rules create excess complication. I completely disagree with the department that they would need extra staffing to simplify the rules. There is going to be a transition period, but there's been many transition periods. There are currently roughly 87 positions that aren't filled and are funded, and they're asking for 77 new positions for implementing this, and that doesn't make any sense at all. I think that that's just a way to add cost, and I don't think it's necessary. So the changes that I would recommend to this bill, first of all, 90 days to us was a compromise. We believe people should remain continuously sheltered, and so 60 days highlights very serious concerns to our organization, and I'll write more about that in my testimony. But a highlight that I want to make is changing the definition of disability to meet the American with Disabilities Act definition. I think that it's broadly accepted definition of disability and ensures that our state is following the spirit and guidance of this important law. It is the same definition used in the Fair Housing Act and the definition published on the HUD website. It is a definition that's supported by Vermont Legal Aid, Vermont Center for Independent Living and Disability Rights Vermont, as well as our organization. These are the organizations who work most closely with people with disabilities and understand the laws and the impacts of these laws. It reads as follows. The ADA definition of disability is a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity.
I think that captures the spirit of what we were trying to say earlier.
Right.
Yeah, and it is on the HUD website, but it's helpful.
Yeah, and the definition that's currently in the bill is based on an exception that I actually have, so I know quite well, for my Section 8 voucher. It was based on, the reason I received it is because I had an illness that I live with and used to be much more severe, and the need to live in a house free of mold because I had a severe allergy with mold, and as well as the potential that one day I would need someone living in my home. Fortunately, I've surpassed that time. It allowed me the exception from several rules, and while the definition applied matches the definition there, its broad ability to be interpreted in Section 8 or in HUD is much different than what would happen in So that's why going to the American with Disabilities Act definition is incredibly important. We saw in the implementation of the Budget Adjustment Act and the subsequent lawsuit that when the legislature is not explicit, it leaves room for misinterpretation. And that is very difficult challenge for providers, for legal aid, for people on the ground.
Can I ask a question about that? So the difference between the two definitions, the HUD definition is broader than the ADA definition, or is it vaguer? What is?
So sorry, it's confusing. The ADA definition is broader. The ADA definition is what our federal government has accepted as the definition of disability. The HUD, what's in the bill right now is not the HUD definition. On HUD's website, they have the ADA definition. But what's in the bill right now is actually just a particular exception for your Section 8 voucher. That's how it's used. It's not used as the definition of disability. Does that make better sense? Maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
No. No.
No?
What's the real distinction in layman's terms?
So in the bill right now, it says that with the ability that you don't have the ability to live on your own. And that's not a definition of disability. There's lots of reasons that someone could not live outside, but could live on their own. That would be exceptionally dangerous to their health or the safety of others. And so the American with Disabilities Act definition better captures both what's accepted federally and the actual need that we're talking about right now. And nobody's living with someone else in a hotel, so that it doesn't really make sense for this anyways.
So this is a point of clarification that we'll have to make and ensure that the bill is clear in the way that we want it as we go forward.
Right.
Yes.
Another change is that I would recommend including the emergency housing disability variance form. I will accept, I don't love, but I will accept the form that was recently approved that requires medical providers. We agree that form of verification should be accepted, as that I saw in the commissioner's letter. However, we think that form has already been identified by this body and can be included right now. And that's the emergency housing disability variance request form. We also think that short-term medical conditions can be severe while discharged from the hospital longer than 30 days prior. So if somebody has a heart attack or a heart condition, if someone had a surgery, there's medical conditions that you might have been discharged from the hospital 60 days ago, but you still have a very severe short-term medical condition. So I really believe that should be used. The emergency disability variance request form should be the tool rather than a time limit, because that leaves a doctor to determine that safety concern. Or a medical provider. I also have a real problem, and I've always had a real problem with the third trimester of pregnancy. I think that as a person who's been pregnant, and anyone in this room who's been pregnant, I think that the entirety of pregnancy you should be able to be inside. I think that's incredibly important. And then also it leaves a situation often where people have their baby and then that they can't continue to be inside. So I don't know what we're asking of pregnant women in our state, but I think we should probably shelter them.
Yeah.
I find it really surprising that we haven't gotten there yet. We agree with the department that I heard in Senate appropriations that the definition of people of loss should include death of a minor child. We also think it should not include the limit of within the last 30 days. I think anybody who's lost someone knows that 30 days is not enough. I also want to say that we serve several clients especially with disabilities, who lose a parent, and that parent was their caregiver. And so I honestly, even not a minor child, but an adult who lived with their parent and that was their entire support system, I think that is something that we have often lamented should be included. And we think that there's, should not be a 30-day limit. We agree with the department on flood, fire, or natural disaster. Oftentimes, people have somewhere to go in the first month of their natural disaster. I will use the example of people staying in the Red Cross shelter after the July flood. And that would have, this rule as a 30-day time limit would have, cut out anybody in those Red Cross shelters. So I think we should be careful about that. And then court-ordered and constructive eviction has been defined by the Human Services Board for the last 20 years, much differently than the department defines it, and the department refuses to include the Human Services Board repetitive definition and decisions based on this. And so I would ask, and I will include it in my written testimony, that this bill adopt the Human Services Board recommendation, because what it does that's different than what the department does is it identifies a reality, which is that people in poverty also often live in informal situations. That they're expecting to be able to stay in, so they may not have a formal eviction. They also often are preyed upon, and that they are told by a landlord to leave without being given a formal eviction letter. If they do not go through the formal eviction process, then they oftentimes are denied shelter. So the Human Services Board actually has a definition that they address in a much better and clearer way, that really is true to what it means to be in poverty and homeless in our state. The emergency task force, we support the emergency task force. We think it's really important. We are recommending that the Vermont Center for Independent Living have a seat on that board. Because there's no disability agency that has a seat on the board, and I think that's incredibly important. I believe that the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont supports that, and Vermont Legal Aid supports that as well. I think, yep, okay. And I've already checked with Sarah Lunderbill at Vermont Center for Independent Living, and you'll probably hear from her, but she would like to have a seat on that board. Finally, I'm just gonna say that in the letter provided by the department, it is really critical to understand that most of what they're saying can be addressed in the task force. And so I feel like they're asking the legislature to identify clarification that really should be identified by the task force, which was kind of the point of that. In my written testimony, I will include an addendum that has responses to some of the clarification, because also some of it already is clarified in the way that processes work in the department, and is not necessary. It feels like it's kind of like slowing the process. It's not necessary for each of those things to be addressed right now. We do have the ones that we've identified, the very few things that we actually agree as a department that there needs to be some clarification on. And what I want to leave you with, I have not, usually I tell all kinds of stories of all the people that I've helped, but I'm just gonna reflect back to last week. And in my testimony, there's more information about how I helped, how we helped, how our organization helped, and what happened when we tried to help or work with them. Last week, now I don't know if it was 2 weeks ago, but we supported someone on oxygen who was 69 years old, who had because the department is asked to go back to periods of ineligibility. So that's what I'm referencing here. Someone on oxygen who was 69 years old, who was given a 6-month period of ineligibility for causing her own homelessness, saying that she could have afforded her rent. She was living in her car. Her oxygen was tanked. She could not run, which she needs 100% of the time. And I was not having a lot of trouble getting her through. It took me several days. We did eventually realize that she actually had a no cause eviction, and even in her cause eviction, it said at the bottom, even if this fails, she is still being evicted for no cause. So she should have been qualified all along. But periods of ineligibility create, we don't say to people in corrections, you made a mistake, or you screwed up, or you were violent, and now you have to live outside and freeze to death for the next 30 days or 6 months or whatever. And I think that that's really important for us to understand here, is that that's what we're asking of people. We have had a client who had recently been hit by a train and had an amputated leg. He was outside for 2 months, and he's a very challenging client to house. Luckily, we got an exception at a hotel that we felt he would be successful, and he has been successful. But at other hotels, he would be exited. We have a client with autism who has been exited from hotels and got a period of eligibility. And he was violent, but he was on the wrong medication. And so when the department says, what if people are violent or dangerous? The majority of people, when that happens, there's something going on with their mental health or their disability. And we have found in our organization, and VCIL has as well, that we can support them in transitioning to a different setting, a different hotel that has a better setup for them. And then they are able to be successful long-term. So I think that punishment is just too high a bar to make people struggling, especially with a lot of trauma, pay for making a mistake of any kind. So I'm gonna leave it at that because I've been given the time signal.
No, first of all, thank you so much. Your own lived experience has certainly informed the work that you're doing, and it is significant work. We understand that, and we really appreciate the comments that you're bringing to this bill, this legislation, the whole solution to homelessness across the state. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Jim.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, and I'm available to ask any questions too as they come up, once I do give you my full testimony.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a dissertation, so it's very well organized.
Get it in, because it's helpful, it's very helpful.
Thank you, I'll get it in today.
Yeah, great.
Thanks so much.
So Frank Knack is here. And for folks that I just learned that this is airport. No, this is not air.
Yes, the new one. I have hard copies of my testimony to be helpful, but I submitted them online, but anyone who saw it.
Yeah, thank you.
Hard copy.
What we're going to do is we're going to finish our testimony on this, and then we're going to take a short break. And come back to the other bills with Jen. Back. Wait, maybe Katie. You want one of these?
Sure.
Okay. Good, thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you all so much for the opportunity to testify. My name is Frank Knack. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont, which you may not have heard of, but we are a merger of two organizations that have been around Vermont for a long time. Vermont Coalition and Homelessness, and the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition merged last summer to create HHAV. We are a membership organization, so we have over 50 members that represent the full phase of this work. So folks on the housing side, on the services side, on the shelter side, can work with our members to understand the root causes, the root solutions, and then advocate around those issues. We're also the collaborative applicant for the Balance of State Continuum of Care. And so for understanding Vermont, there's Chittenden County has a continuum of care, and then all the other counties are working through the Balance of State, which we're the collaborative applicant for. So HHAV kind of wears two hats, one on the advocacy side and one on the services side, working and coordinating the continuum of care. Just I'm obviously not going to run down all this and just hit some of the highlights that haven't been touched on yet. A little bit about the scope of the problem and why we're really excited about this opportunity to finally have a plan and a constructive solution to the issue. And so if you haven't seen last year, the point in time count, which is the kind of number that we use to understand homelessness in Vermont, Vermont had the second highest per capita rate of homelessness in the entire country, a rate that had gone up over 18% between the year before and last year. We should have the new PIT count data next month. And so the data I'm working off of is the most recent. We'll be able to get that data next month from this year. And so in terms of shelter provision, we've had, obviously a lot of work done during the pandemic to house people, but we really had no adequate plan. And so if you actually look at the data around, the shelter capacity in Vermont and what we've had to do to fill the gap, I think it articulates why we need to have this type of plan going forward. So we have around 540 or so shelter bed capacity or household capacity in Vermont right now. All of those are full. And so the folks who are working through the motel program right now are in addition. And so that's because we don't have additional shelter capacity right now. So shelter capacity is maxed. We have about 1,500 households in the GA program right now, which are obviously in addition to the 500 plus shelter units that are currently being used. And so, I think that really highlights, you know, the scope of the problem. And I think it's also important to recognize that those folks in there right now are the most vulnerable. And so I think there was a question raised about why we're not housing everyone who is unsheltered. You know, from HHEB's perspective, we think we should absolutely be doing that. We think that's the bare minimum. But understand, you know, the legislature has made decisions that we are, you know, going to go with certain categories of people. And so just really want to highlight that category that we're talking about right now, those 1,500 people are the most vulnerable. They're folks that this legislature has identified as vulnerable. And so about any program that may even kick out some of those who are already the most vulnerable. And so supported the bill as it came over from the House, but do have concerns, as Brenda lifted up, with going down to 60 days, you know, talking with our service providers. You know, the length of stay is often substantially, I mean, you cannot get a place in most parts of Vermont right now in 60 days. And so we are going to be exiting people in homelessness, and again, exiting people who are already deemed to be the most vulnerable into homelessness. So we're extremely concerned about that. And so additional reason why we're appreciative of the work that's been done on this bill and the work you all are doing right now is also another thing that we've heard from our members is the lack of consistency. And so, like, as you all recall, a couple weeks ago when the VAA was implemented, there was, you know, tons of confusion. What, you know, who's in? Am I eligible? Am I not eligible? That's not only a hardship on the people who are being housed in the shelter, but also on the service providers who don't know, like, what do I tell folks, or how do I plan for this, or what do we need to do? And so moving towards what this bill envisions is kind of creating a consistent structure going forward. Will not, you know, even if it's not going to house everyone, which we wish it would, it at least at a minimum creates consistency. And so folks who are unhoused will understand the rules, understand when, you know, what they should expect, how they can plan. And also the providers can understand the rules and how they should plan, how they can plan. So like staffing is all these things that, you know, as managers you can understand to be able to effectively run the organization that helps doing so. And so we're really excited about the task force. I know there's been some discussion about the task force, but we agree, as was mentioned earlier, this is a very complicated issue, and we really right now don't understand the scope of the problem and what that actual solution should be. And so the task force creates this opportunity for us to do that. And so within HHAB, we've been working through both continuing care, so coordinating closely with Chittenden County and with the balance of state. Really a subcommittee working on like what is the scope of the problem right now? So what is the current universe of shelter in Vermont? What is it statewide? What is it by district? And also what is it by specialty? So for people who may need specific mental health shelter capacity or TBI capacity, whatever those things may be. So understanding what the universe is and by locality, and then what should it be, which I think is a question that we haven't really addressed. So looking at the HMIS data to understand these are the current people in the system, statewide, by district, by specialty needs. And so then by taking what the current capacity is and overlaying that with what the data shows we're at, we'll actually be able to map out a plan. And so we'll be able to say, you know, this is what Vermont should look like. And then we can then say, these are the human investments, these are the capital investments for us to get there. And so by working through this task force, we'll be able to take that concrete data, work together with all the relevant partners to basically map this out, and then come into the next session with a concrete plan based on data about how we're going to build this out, to be able to articulate what it should be, to justify why it should be that way, and to actually have a plan to build that capacity out. Because I think one of the things we're concerned about this year is all these, again, kind of last minute responses, like, you know, state of Congress, when, you know, the partners on the ground are saying, we can't do that. And so then we have to go to out-of-state folks to do that. So this, again, gives us the ability to kind of look at capacity, look at resources, and map that out. And finally, I think, you know, I not lose sight of what the actual solution is. So the solution to all of this is housing, in constructing more permanently affordable housing in Vermont. So that's why we were very supportive of bills that would create revenue and have that long-term plan. But also recognizing that we're not going to build our way into that plan in a year or 2 years or 5 years. It's going to take a decade plus for us to get there. And so in the interim, we can't forget that there are, you know, in this case, 1,500 plus households that are the most vulnerable, that are unhoused. And so we need to continue to provide that structure to keep people housed. And also, we're very appreciative of the way they created the new winter weather program. And again, creating clarity, so it's not, you know, currently right now, it's between November 15 and December 15. It's day to day, so depending on where you live in Vermont, if it's below, I think 20 degrees for 3 hours, or below 32 degrees and a 50% chance of raining for 3 hours, then you make it. Like it's just not a way. And so imagine being someone in that situation. Like, if I'm employed, do I need to get all my stuff out of there tonight? Do I have a place? Like, how do you actually have any stability and move out of that into permanent housing when you don't have that kind of clarity night to night? And so what this would do would create that clarity during the winter months, so folks would know between this date and this date, I'm safe, I can plan my life, I can do my work, I can kind of continue to build and move out where I'm at now towards permanent housing. So for that reason, we're really excited. And then just to conclude, there was a question, I think, in DCF's letter around having the continuum of care have places on the task force. And so just to be 100% transparent with this committee, as it's drafted now, HHAB has 5 appointees. And so we right now, in terms of thinking about who that should look like, are working through both continuum of care. So we're going to be having a continuum of care look at the universe. These are the specific expertise that we would want to make sure is represented, and really have that decision kind of go through the continuum of care. So it's already being done, and we're just kind of coordinating that work right now. So just to be transparent, the continuum of care, both of them are going to be key in that decision making, and so we'll absolutely have seats on that task force. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Right, and so how long have you been in this position? Because I know Earhart left.
Yes, just since in December. So I'm brand new. Yeah, so I grew up in Southern Vermont, but then moved away 2003. So I came back to Vermont.
See, people do come back.
Yeah. Yes. So very, very, very glad to be back again.
We're glad you're here. Thank you. Thanks for your testimony.
Thanks.
Questions? Okay, be great.
Thank you so much.
So we'll bring DCF up. So that was tandem.
You do want to hear from us now before break?
Yeah, we're gonna hear from you and then we'll
Excellent.
all testimony.
Got it.
And maybe just FYI, we may not get 766, that's the one. Hold on till tomorrow, because it's on the schedule, and we'll do what we can do, and you can be taken. We do need to hear, is that emergency testimony? That, no, it's prior.
Oh, right. Okay.
Good morning. Thank you for having us in. For the record, my name is Chris Winters. I'm the Commissioner of the Department for the Children and Families.
And for the record, Mariah Bray, Deputy Commissioner for Economic Services Division.
So
We have a little bit.
we have Lily Marvel from DCF also. Lily Sojourner, the Director of our Office of Economic Opportunity, may be joining us online.
Oh, good, all right.
Hi, Chris, for the record, I am here virtually.
Excellent. Thanks.
Lily Sojourner with the Office of Economic Opportunity. Thanks.
Perfect. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk to you about H 879. And we also want to first start off by acknowledging and appreciating the work that the House Committee on Human Services did in crafting this bill. I will, just note at the outset that it came together fairly quickly at the end toward crossover. So we didn't really get an opportunity to testify on it on that side. We understood that and they understood that, and they understood that the Senate would fix anything that needed fixing.
Thank you for that. Yeah. We know.
Doesn't mean we're gonna fix it in the way you want.
I wasn't saying that at all. So we also really appreciate the opportunity to work with you on this bill to make it into something that hopefully we can operationalize that's really clear. We've learned from many past experiences and some mistakes that if we don't have clarity and we don't have adequate time to roll out a program, it really makes it difficult for us, and that has an impact on the people that we're trying to serve and an impact on the advocates who are trying to help serve the clients on the ground. Addressing homelessness is something that we all share as a goal, and really look forward to partnering on that. In looking at this is from my testimony that is posted on your website. In reviewing the proposed emergency temporary shelter program language, the AHS believes that without significant changes to spur the creation of housing units. You heard Frank speak to this, and I think we all allude to it and think about it all the time. Without significant changes to spur creation of housing units in Vermont, the proposal really won't change the trajectory for Vermonters experiencing homelessness. So there's a lot of prevention work that we try to do and we can continue to do, but without a unit to move someone into, it's really hard to help them move into those units. So I would, strongly encourage supporting and taking a look at S311 and some of the other housing bill reforms that would help hopefully speed up and make it easier to develop more affordable housing in the state. There are three major areas of concern that we have. One, of course, is budget, and we all know that a lot of this comes back to the money available for programs, and this is a really difficult decision that this body is going to have to struggle with in determining how much funding is available to keep people sheltered who may currently be sheltered in the hotel motel program, in the shelter system, or maybe unhoused and unsheltered at this time. The governor's recommended budget contained $8.3 million in base funding. That was $7.5 million for emergency housing and $839,000 for security. There's additionally $16.5 million in one-time funding for a total of approximately $24.8 million. When we look at the proposal in H879 and cost it out, we think it's roughly $54 million, depending on clarifying some of the intent. We've been able to clarify some of that since our testimony in Senate Appropriations, where we thought it was actually an even bigger number. But we think it's somewhere in the range of $54 million, depending on clarification of intent. And so, of course, the funding for the program is one major concern. The other, you've heard a little bit of testimony about and have already addressed in some ways, the issues and priorities raised within the program could be addressed by the tax force. And we recommend that a number of pieces of this, the definitions that listed here, household eligibility, there's a caveat to that. I think we could clarify and get some of the eligibility laid out in this bill rather than in the appropriations bill. We'd love to work with the Ledge Council on that, on eligibility. Applications, notices, appeals, participant requirements, coordinated entry, all of those in the reporting could be shifted to items for the task force to act on as part of their body of work. We do have some concerns about the reporting requirements and just want to make sure that you're getting information that's really helpful to you. It isn't just kind of an exercise for us to go through that's not really helpful. So we will have some feedback for you on the reporting requirements. Frank mentioned the HMIS dashboard. There's a lot of great information that can come out of that. And that's something we could incorporate into our reporting to make sure it's useful for you. And then on case management, the new language on case management, I think is something that we need to think about as far as implementation and operationalizing that, what that looks like, what the additional costs may be if we're putting more mandates around case management. We want to do the case management. This was not designed as a case management program, but knowing that people are going to be in hotels and shelters for long periods of time, we really do need to try to engage in case management. And then lastly, there's a very long list of things that we went through line by line to try to clarify the meaning behind the intent.
You're just trying to give me late night reading.
I'm very sorry that if you have trouble sleeping, then that might. So there's a lot of questions that we have. I don't think that much of it is insurmountable. That they're just, we want to make sure that it's very clear so that we can implement the legislature's will around this. So there's a long list here of specific concerns that certainly won't go through right now, but if you have specific questions, I think Miranda could help clarify, and Lily as well, with their experience with the GA program and with shelters, some of the language that we just like to tweak and work with legislative council around. And then there are a few other things about eligibility that you heard. We do have some concerns around specific pieces of eligibility, including the 30-day restriction on losing your house in a natural disaster or death of a spouse, adding child to that. So there's just a long list here and some things that we would tweak around eligibility and some clarification that we need around language before we could. those are my general comments there. Happy to answer questions. Miranda is also here to answer questions.
I do have a question, but I'm gonna make the comment first. The list here that you have, should this committee work on the bill at this level of detail, we would be here until the end of May. We don't have the luxury of time that the House has had to go through the bill. So and I know that we've already, I've been talking with Katie, she had already identified some of the rules that you've also identified, in particular with respect to reach up with TANF.
That's right.
So those things, I think, those can be automatically addressed here for us. The other question that I had asked her about the definition of disability, and as she answered it, as it was included within the hub definition, that mental health is also there. That's something, and then we've heard further about ADA definition, so that's something. Your comment number 2, asking us to take everything out, stop, sort of eliminate the program, take everything out and put it in the task force seems somewhat redundant based on the fact that the House has already been through all this. So thinking about, if I were on that task force, I would say, well, let's look at that in context, in the context of the program that's been laid out. But maybe that's what we need to do, is to simply say, to address or to look at the program as proposed, should the bill be passed. So without having to go back and reinvent and redo everything, that's a concern. And I know there may be some very specific areas here that would improve the bill. And I'm going to talk with Katie about that and have her reach out to either you or others who have been integrally involved with this. If there's something we can do that is quick. So that's my comment. I know the committee's gonna have to make that endorse the kind that or not. How is vacancy determination happening today, and how difficult is that to do? At what frequency?
You mean the statewide rental vacancy rate?
Yeah.
Me too.
It's not being used to determine the number of days. The number of days have been set, and it varies on the program that we're running because that has changed. But that is something that we see as being challenging to implement because it also has a lag. It comes out quarterly. There's a lag to that. And so what if something has changed? If they were eligible for the 60 days originally, now they're only eligible for 45. How do we explain that very plainly? So that is something that we would.
So that struck me as something that was problematic in terms of administrating the program and making it happen. So maybe there's a suggestion that you could make around that.
We can do that.
Okay, that would be helpful. And I think the quarterly reporting that was added or changed in the bill rather than monthly.
May I agree, or
I do want you to talk.
I think that would be focused on the reporting. A lot of that is carryover from Act 81. So a lot of those processes are also not in place. So we're being asked to report on things that we're not going to be able to report on. So I think in agreement with Frank, we have an HMIS dashboard. It is collective. It's not just who economic services is housing in motels. It's going to tell you about the entire population of Vermonters who are homeless. And then we are still committed to, we have been putting up, right now it is weekly information. It was just on the June cohort. So now we're looking at like, okay, what information can we share and making sure that we don't identify anyone, because sometimes our numbers are very small and those identifiers can tell you exactly who it is. So just looking at what can we share, and we're committed to doing that and providing that. We have been doing it weekly. We can do it monthly if that's the preference. But I think we can have those two things, and we would also ask to have that section struck, because a lot of it we're not going to be able to report on. The same as everybody wants to know what happens to people when they leave the GA motels. We don't know. We have tried so many different ways to be able to engage with Vermonters around that, and they don't have to let us know. And so that will just continue with something that
Well, but to the extent that you can do it, it would be helpful. We're not, that,
My understanding that is some of the HMIS information that's captured where people transitioning to.
all right, so I'm gonna see if there's one or two more questions, and we're gonna stop briefly, and then we're gonna move on to the other bills. It's a big deal, it's a huge thing, and it's not simple. Oh, Senator Hardy and Senator Weeks each have a question.
Senator Hewitt.
So Gila,
Senator
Let-
Lewis first.
I'm not, I have to be.
There you go.
It's actually not a question. I just wanted to make suggested edits to the bill, but are we gonna get to that later? Okay.
Well, just, I would hope that we could talk with the committee about which, or any of
Yes,
these that
we
we
will.
want to do rather than have it done.
Well, we want Ledge Council to weigh in because some
Well,
of
sure.
this is relevant, some of it may not be. So that's
Absolutely.
the
I mean, I
point.
think some of these are like fine suggestions about clarity and that's great. I guess I would also say that, I don't think we should just take everything out of the bill and have the task force, define everything. The House has done a ton of work on this, time, and I don't want their work to go.
So you're in agreement with the comment that I made?
I am absolutely
All
in
in
agreement,
email.
yes, that we work as much as we can to
Yeah.
fix some things, but that we don't put it all on the task.
So in the question around the dashboard and the vacancy reporting, and that's something that you guys can clarify a little bit with Katie, that would be helpful. Senator Weeks.
yes, ma'am. Just a couple of questions. Like, the sense we're not gonna get these guys back in the room all at the same time in the future. So just based on
My,
lessons learned from the previous transition periods that we all went through, two questions. First, is there consideration, or from your perspective, should there be any consideration on residency requirements? And if so, yeah, how long, or if not, why not?
Yeah, Senator, we don't have a residency requirement. We've had legal advice on that. If someone appears in Vermont and says they're intending to stay in Vermont, then they are treated as a Vermonter. And, generally speaking, we do want to welcome people to the state. We want people to stay here and be a part of the state of Vermont, be productive citizens. So, housing could be part of it.
And the second thing was, just wondering, there was some talk about standardizing the application form or to get this and or another variety of other varieties of support. I'm wondering if there was any discussion of a means test for applicants for this program. Now we're kind of like, we appear to be kind of re-entering the program with a means test.
Could you clarify what you mean by needs test?
Do they have financial needs to take care of themselves as opposed to the state stepping in?
So that's already a part of the program and that's where we have income contributions, that people must,
In here, this is because I didn't read any of that.
I guess we would need to clarify our income contributions, something that would be included. They are currently. So thank you for finding that
So
out.
they are currently good, because I do remember that from last year.
Yes,
That they intend to transition into whatever this becomes in the future.
I think that would be the intent to be this week.
Okay, thanks.
okay. Any other questions? I would like for us to take a short break at this point. Frank, would you like to make one comment?
Sorry, one flag, I omitted to say, Brendan mentioned, that BCIL's, request to be on the task force that we had support. I just want to confirm that we do support that.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize for not
Brenda
doing
did
that.
bring that up, so that's helpful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Sorry, thanks.
All right, so what I would like for us to do is to take 5 minutes and come back just before 11:30. We are behind schedule. We will work with Jen on the bills that we have in front of us and